The void between stars holds secrets older than memory. The deep space freighter Star Seeker shudders as it drops from warp, its hull groaning in protest. Before it hangs a world of jagged rock and perpetual twilight, a planet marked on no chart. But it is not the desolation that chills the crew, it is the signal. Scanners light up with impossible energy readings, a pulse of power emanating from deep beneath the barren surface. Captain Eva Rostova stares at the data stream, her face illuminated by the ghostly glow. Her voice is little more than a whisper, lost in the hum of the ship. That is not natural. It is an echo of something ancient, and it is calling to us. This is the beginning of a journey into the heart of a forgotten empire, a story that will reveal a power capable of healing worlds or destroying them. You will discover the ultimate fate of a civilization that reached for the stars and vanished without a trace. What would you risk to answer a call from the darkness? That signal was a ghost in the machine, a whisper of pure data cutting through the cosmic static. The Star Seeker's computers worked furiously, filtering out the background noise of the dead planet until the transmission resolved into a structure of breathtaking complexity. It was not a simple distress call or a warning. It was a mathematical tapestry, woven with a precision that defied natural formation. Patterns within patterns unfolded, revealing a rhythmic, repeating sequence at its core. In the ship's dimly lit analysis lab, the air grew thick with anticipation. Dr. Eris Thorne, the crew's linguist and cryptographer, watched the symbols cascade across his screen, his fingers tracing the elegant curves of a language lost to time. His usual calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a focused intensity. He worked for hours, cross-referencing the ship's vast xenolinguistic databases, searching for any fragment that might match the alien script. Then he found it, a connection to a proto-dialect known only from ancient ruins on a handful of worlds, the linguistic fossil of the civilization they now called the Precursors. His voice was a low murmur, translating the haunting phrase as it repeated into the silence. The throne of stars awaits its heir. The words hung in the air, charged with a meaning that was both an invitation and a riddle. Captain Rostova felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. This was not merely an artifact. It was a legacy, a message meant for someone. But they were not the only listeners in the dark. Scanners detected the faint energy signature of another ship, still distant but on a direct intercept course. Rival scavengers, drawn by the same anomalous energy readings, the race was now on. The choice was stark: turn away from the mystery and its inherent danger, or plunge toward the source of the signal, into the ruins of a forgotten empire, hoping to uncover the truth before it fell into the wrong hands. The Star Seeker sliced through the thin, whispering atmosphere, its hull groaning under the strain. Below, the world unveiled itself in shades of gray and deep shadow. Jagged mountains clawed at a sky perpetually stuck in twilight, and vast canyons cut deep scars into the planet's face. It was a landscape of profound and utter silence. Captain Rostova guided the ship low over the desolation, her eyes fixed on the navigation display where the signal's origin pulsed like a steady, silent heartbeat. The source was not a mountain or a structure, but a vast depression in the planet's crust. They came to a hover over it, and the crew stared in disbelief. It was a sinkhole, but one of impossible geometry. A perfect circle, so wide its opposite rim was lost in the haze, its edges unnaturally smooth. It was a wound in the world, a puncture leading down into absolute blackness. Pilot Jax leaned forward in his seat, his knuckles white on the controls. His voice was low, cutting through the tense quiet. That is no meteor crater. The precision is all wrong. That is an entrance. His words settled over the command deck like a cold weight. An entrance made by intelligence for a purpose they could not begin to fathom. The signal was no longer an abstract puzzle on a screen. It was a beacon, and it was emanating from the darkness directly below their ship. The ghostly whisper had led them to a doorway, and every instinct told them that whatever lay beyond it would change everything. The descent into the sinkhole was a plunge into a silence so deep it felt like a physical pressure. Captain Rostova led the way, her harness creaking as she rappelled down the unnaturally smooth wall. Below her feet, the beam of her headlamp dissolved into a blackness that seemed to swallow light itself. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of ancient stone and something else, a faint, metallic tang like ozone after a storm. One by one, the exploration team followed, a small chain of light descending into the heart of the unknown. After what felt like an eternity, their boots finally touched solid ground. The space around them was not a cave. It was a tunnel, so vast its ceiling was lost in shadow, its walls stretching away into the darkness on either side. The floor was perfectly level, a seamless surface of a dark, polished material that felt unnervingly warm to the touch. Jax swept his light across the wall, and the beam caught something that made him freeze. "Captain, look at this." Etched into the stone were lines of intricate symbols, flowing in elegant curves and sharp angles, but they were not merely carved. They glowed with a soft, internal light, a pale blue luminescence that pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, perfectly matching the signal that had drawn them here. Dr. Eris Thorne stepped forward, his hand hovering just above the glowing script. He did not touch it, as if afraid to profane something sacred. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hushed with a reverence that bordered on fear. "This script," he whispered, his eyes tracing the alien patterns, "it is not just old. It predates every known empire by millennia. The foundational languages we have catalogued, the first whispers of civilization on a dozen worlds, they are all derivative." Crude echoes of this. He turned to face Rostova, his face illuminated by the ghostly blue light. "We have not just found ruins, Captain. We are standing in the cradle. This is the source. The signal was not a call for help. It was a record keeper, and we have just walked into its library." The tunnel stretched onward, the luminescent script their only guide through the oppressive dark. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, charged with a latent energy that raised the hairs on their arms. After a long, cautious walk, the walls abruptly fell away, and their headlamps failed to find a ceiling or distant walls. They had stepped into a cavern of impossible scale, a subterranean world swallowed by shadow. In the center of this vast emptiness, directly in their path, stood a single, stark silhouette. It was a statue, carved from a material so pure black it seemed to be a hole in reality, a void given form. It depicted a tall, elegant being with vast wings folded against its back, its features serene yet imposing. As the team drew nearer, their footsteps echoing in the immense silence, the statue began to change. A soft azure light ignited within its eyes, not a reflection, but a deep, internal fire. Then a voice resonated not through the air, but within their very minds, a sound like grinding stone and chiming crystal. It spoke a single, terrifying command. "State your lineage, seeker, or be turned to dust." The words vibrated through their bones, a final, absolute barrier. Captain Rostova froze, her hand instinctively moving away from her sidearm, understanding on a primal level that weapons were useless here. Dr. Thorne stared, his mind racing through 1,000 linguistic possibilities. What answer could satisfy a gatekeeper from a dead empire? To claim a human lineage would be meaningless. To lie would be fatal. This was the moment of truth the signal had promised, a test for an heir that did not exist. The throne of stars awaited, but its guardian demanded a bloodline lost to time. Seconds stretched into an eternity under the statue's burning gaze. Dust motes danced in the beams of their headlamps, each one a tiny world suspended in the moment before annihilation. Captain Eva Rostova's mind raced, But every logical path led to a dead end. They had no lineage to state, no secret password from a history they did not share. Her eyes scanned the statue's base, desperate for any clue, and that is when she saw it. To the side, almost invisible against the seamless dark material, was a single, palm-sized panel of crystal. It was smooth and cool, utterly unadorned. It was not a control panel. It felt more like a touchstone, a place for a handshake across time. It was the only feature in an otherwise impassive guardian. With no other option, and the psychic pressure of the command building in her skull, Eva made a choice. She stepped forward, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from Dr. Thorn. She did not speak. Instead, she placed her bare palm flat against the crystal surface. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. She braced for the searing heat of a defensive blast, for the statue's stone hand to strike her down. Then the panel flared to life. A soft, vibrant green light emanated from beneath her hand, spreading through the crystal like liquid emerald. The change in the statue was instantaneous. The fierce blue light in its eyes softened to a gentle, welcoming gold. The grinding, psychic voice returned, but the tone was utterly transformed. It was no longer a threat, but a recognition, filled with a deep, ancient respect. Blood of the first architects confirmed. Passage is granted. The statue took a single, smooth step to the side, its stone wings rustling with a sound like shifting sand. The way forward was open. Eva pulled her hand back, staring at her own palm as if seeing it for the first time. The words echoed in the silence she had left behind. Blood of the first architects. They were not just explorers who had stumbled upon a tomb. She had been led here. The signal had not been a general broadcast into the void. It had been a homing beacon, and she was the one it was calling home. The mystery of the Forgotten Empire was no longer an abstract puzzle. It was now deeply, terrifyingly personal. Beyond the Guardian, the air itself changed, becoming thick and resonant, humming with a low thrum that was felt more than heard. The narrow tunnel opened into a hall of breathtaking scope, a chamber so vast its far end was lost in a soft, pearlescent haze. But it was not the size that stole their breath. It was the life that filled it. The entire space shimmered with soft light, populated by hundreds of translucent figures. Holograms of tall, graceful beings with luminous skin and large, dark eyes moved with a serene purpose. They glided along unseen paths, their forms occasionally flickering as they passed through one another. They were conversing in silent, animated gestures, their faces expressing a range of emotions from quiet contentment to intense intellectual debate. The air was filled with the ghostly murmur of their long-vanished voices. Dr. Eris Thorn stood transfixed, his analytical mind overwhelmed by the sheer emotional weight of the scene. His voice was a whisper of awe. This is not a tomb. It is a memory bank, a perfect living snapshot of their final day. He watched a group of the beings, the first architects, gather around a floating schematic of a star system, their hands gracefully manipulating the light. They were not preparing for war or flight. They were simply living, caught in a moment of peaceful, advanced civilization. Then, as if a single switch had been thrown, the entire scene froze. The gentle murmur ceased, replaced by an absolute, deafening silence. Every single holographic figure, from the children playing with orbs of light to the elders deep in discussion, stopped their motion. In one unified, chilling movement, every head turned. Hundreds of pairs of luminous eyes fixed directly on the small group of human intruders. There was no hostility in their gazes, no anger. Instead, there was a profound, unnerving curiosity, the look of archivists examining a specimen that had wandered out of its designated time. The Hall of Echoes was no longer a recording. It had become an audience, and the team were the performers on a stage they did not understand. The frozen tableau held its breath for an eternity. Then, the crowd of spectral figures parted, their forms shimmering as they made a path. From their midst, a single hologram glided forward. It was an elder, its form more defined, its features etched with a solemn wisdom that seemed to transcend time itself. It stopped directly before Eva, and its eyes, deep pools of ancient light, locked onto hers. A voice filled the chamber, not as a psychic command, but as a clear, resonant speech that carried the weight of millennia. "You have come for the Star-Throne's power." The statement was not an accusation, but a simple, devastating fact. The elder continued, its gaze unwavering. "Know that it sealed our fate. We reached for the fire of creation itself, and in our pride we were consumed by it. The power you seek does not build. It unmakes, it judges." The being raised a translucent hand, not in threat, but in a gesture of profound warning. "Turn back now, heir, or repeat our extinction." The words hung in the silent hall, a prophecy delivered across the gulf of ages. The warmth Eva had felt from the touchstone vanished, replaced by an icy dread that coiled in her stomach. This was not a welcome. It was an intervention from the grave. The Guardian had tested her bloodline, but this elder was testing her wisdom. The promise of ultimate power was now framed by the ghost of a civilization that had been utterly erased by it. Every instinct to push forward, to uncover the secrets of the first architects, was suddenly thrown into doubt. Were they following a destiny, or marching blindly toward a preordained doom? The choice was no longer about discovery. It was about survival and the cost of ambition. Jack's voice crackled over the comms unit, sharp and strained against the heavy silence of the hall. "Eva, that was a warning, not an invitation. We are meddling with forces we do not understand." Back on the Starseeker, pacing the confined space of the command deck, his fear was a palpable thing, transmitted through the static. Every word was a direct challenge to the captain's authority, and to the destiny she seemed so willing to embrace. "You heard the ghost," he continued, his tone pleading now. "They called it a judgment, they called it extinction. This is not a treasure hunt anymore. We are walking toward a cliff because you felt a warm panel." Eva's reply was measured, but a current of steel ran beneath it. "I heard a being from a dead civilization describe a power they could not control, Jax. Their failure is not a prophecy for us, it is a lesson. This discovery, the very fact that we are standing here, that it recognized me, that has to mean something. It is worth any risk." She stood her ground in the echoing chamber, the holographic elder's warning still vibrating in the air around her. "Can you not see what this is? This is the single greatest moment of contact in human history. We have a chance to learn, to understand something that changes everything we know about the universe." The rift was immediate and deep. On the ship, Jax saw only the grim finality of the warning, a civilization that had been erased as a direct result of the power they now sought. For him, the ghost's message was clear, a signpost pointing only to ruin. But for Eva, standing amid the echoes of that ruin, the same message was a challenge. It was proof that the power was real, and that the first architects, in their final moments, had tried to prevent their own fate from befalling another. The argument was not just about the next step, it was about the very nature of discovery itself. Was caution the mark of wisdom, or the surrender of a once-in-a-species opportunity? The crew was now divided, their mission hanging in the balance between one person's conviction and another's dread. The argument with Jax echoed in the silence that followed, a stark reminder of the fragile thread on which their mission now hung. With a shared, unspoken resolve to press forward, if only to find answers that might justify the risk, the team moved deeper into the labyrinth of light and shadow. The grand hall of echoes gave way to a narrower corridor that spiraled downward, the air growing cooler and the ambient hum of energy more pronounced. It ended at a seamless archway that ear-eyed open at their approach, revealing a chamber that defied all expectation. It was perfectly spherical, and the walls were not walls at all, but a seamless canvas of deepest space. They stood on a narrow walkway that crossed the void at the chamber's equator, suspended in the center of a miniature cosmos. Pinpricks of light swirled around them, resolving into familiar and alien constellations, a map of the galaxy as the first architects had known it. In the very center of the sphere, floating at chest height, was a single, familiar control crystal. Eva did not hesitate this time. She reached out and placed her palm upon it. The starfield erupted into a new configuration. Thousands of golden lines bloomed into existence, connecting star to star in a dense, glittering web of pathways. It was the Empire in its prime, a network of trade, communication, and influence spanning impossible distances. The sight was awe-inspiring, a testament to a civilization that had truly touched the stars. But the awe was short-lived. As they watched, the golden lines began to flicker and fade. One by one, the stars they connected winked out, not with a bang, but with a silent, sorrowful dimming. The vibrant web of gold dissolved into a sparse scattering of gray, dead points. The map was not a celebration of their reach. It was a record of their extinction. The grand territory of the first architects was a graveyard. Then, a single point of light caught Eva's eye. Amid the vast grayscale of dead worlds, one star pulsed with a soft, persistent blue glow. It was isolated, far from the heart of the old empire, a lone beacon in the silence. As Eva focused on it, a single word formed in her mind, a translation provided by the chamber itself. Sanctuary. The message from the Elder Ghost took on a terrifying new clarity. Their empire was unmade by the power they sought, but they had tried to preserve something. A single world set apart, a refuge from the cataclysm. The blinking light was not just a coordinate. It was a question, and perhaps the only hope for understanding what had truly happened, and whether the power of the Star-Throne could ever be safely held. The blue light of Sanctuary pulsed in the darkness, a fragile promise against the weight of all that dead space. That fragile hope shattered in an instant as the Star-Seeker's comms console lit up with a harsh priority alert. A new ship signature had just ripped its way into orbit, its transponder identifying it with a name that sent a chill through every spacer who knew it. The Vulture. Its captain's voice crackled over the open channel, a gravelly snarl stripped of any pretense of diplomacy. Rostova, we have been monitoring your little expedition. The message was short, brutal, and to the point. We know what you have found down there. Hand over the coordinates to the power source and we will let you leave. Refuse and we will dig you out of that hole like the insects you are. The transmission cut out, leaving behind a silence more threatening than any noise. Up on the ship, Jax's voice was tight with a fear that had just been proven right. They are here, Kale. He is not going to negotiate, Eva. He is a scavenger. He strips wrecks and leaves nothing behind. The map chamber suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. They were deep underground, with a single, vulnerable ship in orbit, and a ruthless enemy now blocking their only way out. The philosophical debate with Jax was over. The warning from the holographic elder was no longer a historical lesson. It was a present and immediate danger. Kale and his crew would not be swayed by ghostly prophecies. They would take the location of Sanctuary, they would find the Star-Throne, and they would unleash its power without a second thought, repeating the extinction of the first architects for a handful of credits or a fleeting moment of control. Eva's hand clenched into a fist. The race was no longer about discovery. It was a desperate sprint against time and greed. They had to get back to the Star-Seeker, they had to decipher the precise coordinates from the map, and they had to reach Sanctuary before the Vulture could follow. The fate of a forgotten empire had been a heavy burden. The fate of their own, and perhaps every other civilization, had just been laid squarely on their shoulders. The Vulture's threat echoed in the silence of the map chamber, a ticking clock that made every second feel like a theft from their future. There was no time for wonder now. The blinking light of Sanctuary was their only goal, but the path to its coordinates was blocked. As they retreated from the star-filled sphere, the archway sealed behind them, and the corridor ahead reconfigured itself. The smooth walls slid apart, revealing a new chamber, small and intimate compared to the cosmic vista they had just left. In its center stood a pedestal, and upon it rested a device of stunning beauty and complexity. It was a lattice of interlocking crystals, each one glowing with a different hue, representing what they could only assume were the fundamental elements of the universe. Fire blazed in a red gem, water swirled in a blue one, air shimmered in a clear crystal, and earth was a solid brown stone. But there were others, stranger elements, symbols of energy and void, of light and shadow. The crystals were not fixed. They could be rotated and shifted along grooves in the lattice, and the team knew instinctively that this was a lock. Eris Thorn stepped forward, his eyes tracing the patterns. He tried the obvious first, aligning the traditional elements together, but the lattice remained inert. He attempted sequences based on atomic weights or celestial alignments referenced in the star map. Nothing worked. The crystals clicked into place with a hollow, rejecting sound. Jax watched from the doorway, his anxiety a palpable force. "We are wasting time. Kale could be landing troops right now." But Eris was lost in the puzzle, muttering to himself. "It is not about chemistry," he whispered, his fingers hovering over a crystal that pulsed with a dark, absorbing light, a symbol of pure entropy. "And this," he said, touching a brilliantly white gem that seemed to contain a tiny sun. "This is not just fire. This is creation, Genesis." His eyes widened with a sudden, profound realization. He looked at Eva, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the elements. "Do you not see it? This is not a test of knowledge. It is a test of philosophy." The first architects were not asking us to build something. They are asking us to understand balance. The ultimate power, they warned us about it, is the tension between making and unmaking. To proceed, we must acknowledge both. With a new purpose, his hands moved over the lattice. He did not group the creative elements together. Instead, he paired the white gem of Genesis directly opposite the black crystal of entropy. He balanced the swirling water with the solid earth, the raging fire with the calm air. He built a symphony of opposites, a perfect, stable equilibrium where every force was countered by its equal and necessary counterpart. With a final, decisive click as he slotted the last crystal into its place, the entire lattice flared with a harmonious white light. A deep, grinding rumble shook the room as a section of the wall, previously seamless, slid open, revealing a dark passage that sloped downward. The way to the deeper vault, and hopefully to the precise coordinates of Sanctuary, was open. The lock was not meant to keep people out. It was a final lesson from a fallen empire, a warning that the power they sought could only be approached with an understanding of the cosmic scales. The passage beyond the crystal lock did not lead into darkness, but into a world reborn in light. The air itself seemed to shimmer, thick with the scent of ozone and something sweet, like blooming flowers after a rain. They stepped out from the confined tunnel and onto the soft, mossy bank of an underground river that glowed with a soft, internal cyan light. Above them, a cavern of impossible scale stretched upward, its ceiling a dome of crystalline structures that refracted light into a perpetual, gentle twilight. This was no dead vault. It was a garden. Life thrived here in forms they could barely comprehend. Trees woven from strands of solid amber light swayed in a non-existent breeze, their leaves tinkling like crystal chimes as they brushed against one another. Flowers pulsed with soft, rhythmic colors, opening and closing as if breathing. Small, six-legged creatures that looked like living starlight skittered through the undergrowth, leaving faint, shimmering trails in their wake. The entire ecosystem was a symphony of pure, bioluminescent energy, a self-sustaining refuge hidden deep within the planet's stone heart. A presence washed over them then, not as a sound, but as a feeling of profound peace and ancient sorrow. It was a gentle pressure in their minds, a warmth that carried meaning without language. A voice, composed of many voices whispering in unison, spoke directly into their thoughts. We are the last echoes of the bioengineers, the ones who shaped life to sing with the stars. You seek the core. The voice held no malice, only a deep, weary patience. We have waited for an heir. We will guide you. Before them, the light of the river coalesced, drawing together into the form of a tall, graceful being, mirroring the holograms they had seen but made of living, flowing energy. It gestured with a luminescent hand toward a path that wound through the glowing forest, a route that had not been visible a moment before. Captain Rostova felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. After the warnings and the threats, this felt like a moment of grace. These were not ghosts trapped in a memory. They were caretakers, the living legacy of the Empire's greatest achievement, preserving this sanctuary and its purpose. They were no longer alone in their desperate race against the Vulture. They had found guides who knew the true nature of the power they sought, and the terrible responsibility that came with it. The path through the glowing garden was a journey through a living dream, the light being moved ahead of them, its form flowing like water, leaving a trail of brighter phosphorescence on the mossy ground. It led them to a small, quiet clearing where a pool of still, black water lay perfectly reflective. The being gestured toward the water's surface. To understand the core, you must first understand what was lost. The chorus of voices whispered in their minds. See the world as we knew it. Eva knelt, her reflection swallowed by the darkness as the pool's surface began to ripple and then clear, not showing her own face, but another world entirely. The vision unfolded around them, the garden dissolving into a breathtaking cityscape of impossible architecture. Towers of crystalline light spiraled toward a sky filled with two suns, their surfaces alive with flowing patterns of energy. Ships that looked like living constellations glided silently between the spires, but it was the people that captured Eva's heart. The first architects were everywhere, their luminous forms radiating a palpable sense of peace and purpose. They were not building fortresses or weapons, they were weaving. With gestures of their hands, they coaxed light into bridges that arched gracefully over rivers of molten silver. They nurtured trees that grew buildings from their branches, structures that pulsed with a gentle, organic rhythm. A child laughed, creating a cascade of floating, musical notes from a handful of light. This was not a civilization that conquered its environment. It was one that collaborated with it, a perfect symbiosis between intelligence and the universe itself. Their greatest achievement was not a weapon, but a network, a harmonious field that connected every world in their empire, allowing for the instantaneous sharing of energy, knowledge, and life. It was an age of golden peace, built on a foundation of profound understanding. Then the vision shifted. A shadow fell, not across the suns, but across the network itself. The harmonious field, the very heart of their civilization, began to falter. The gentle hum of connection became a discordant shriek of feedback. The first architects did not panic. They gathered, their faces etched with a desperate, focused calm. They had detected a flaw, a fundamental instability in the fabric of the core's power. It was not an external attack. It was a cancer from within, a consequence of their own perfection. The network, in its infinite connection, had begun to resonate with a frequency that unraveled reality itself. They tried to contain it, to quarantine the effect, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with their hands. The beautiful cities did not explode. They simply faded. The light went out of the towers not with a bang but a sigh. The ships in the sky winked out of existence one by one. The people did not scream, they turned to light and then to dust, their forms dissolving back into the silent energy of the cosmos. The great silence was not an event. It was an unmaking, a wave of stillness that spread from the Empire's heart at the speed of thought. leaving only empty worlds and echoing ruins in its wake. The pool's surface went dark, the last image of a vibrant, laughing child vanishing into the black water. The Golden Age was not destroyed. It was consumed by the very harmony that had created it. Jack's voice screamed through Eva's comm unit, sharp and desperate over the roar of plasma fire. "They are breaching the inner chambers. Eva, whatever you are doing, do it faster." The transmission dissolved into a burst of static and the unmistakable sound of collapsing stone. Up in the upper ruins, the fragile peace of the garden was shattered by the violent echoes of Kale's invasion. The light being guiding them flickered, its serene form wavering as if pained by the sudden intrusion of chaos and weaponry. The race was over. Kale was not waiting in orbit. He was here, tearing through the ancient halls with the brute force of a scavenger who valued only the prize. The serene vision of the lost world evaporated, replaced by the immediate, metallic taste of fear. The path to the core was no longer a pilgrimage, it was an escape route. Eva exchanged a single, grim look with Eris. There was no more time for contemplation. They broke into a run, following the glowing guide as it surged ahead, its light pulsing with a new, urgent rhythm. The garden path twisted, leading them away from the river of light and toward a sheer rock face that seemed to be a dead end. But as they approached, the rock itself shimmered and dissolved, not into an opening, but into a swirling vortex of silver mist. The light being paused at the threshold, its many-voiced whisper filled with a final, solemn charge. "The core lies within. It is the source and the sum of all we were. It will judge you as it judged us. Do not seek to command it. Seek only to understand its balance." With that, the being's form dissolved back into the ambient light of the garden, leaving them alone before the shimmering gateway. The sounds of the firefight above were growing closer. They had one choice left. Eva took a deep breath and stepped into the silver mist. The silver mist did not feel like a barrier, but a transition, a sudden, silent crossing from one state of being to another. It vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Eva and Eris standing in a space that defied all the laws of physics they knew. The chamber was a perfect sphere of absolute blackness, a void so complete it felt as if the very concept of light had been erased. There was no floor, no ceiling, no walls, only an endless, starless night. Yet they did not fall. They stood on a surface that was not there, their breath catching in their throats. The only source of illumination, the only thing that existed in this pocket of non-space, hung in the exact center of the sphere. It was a heart, a crystalline heart the size of a human torso, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light that seemed to emanate from a core of impossible density. With every beat, waves of soft gold and deep violet radiated outward, washing over them in a tide of pure, untamed potential. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a living engine of creation and dissolution suspended in the void. Etched into the non-space before it, lines of softly glowing script hung in the air, a final message from the architects of this impossible place. Eris read the words aloud, his voice a reverent whisper that was swallowed by the profound silence. "The heart answers only to the worthy. To claim it is to accept its burden." The words were simple, but their meaning was a chasm. Worthiness was not about bloodline or knowledge, as the previous tests had suggested. It was about choice, a conscious, irrevocable acceptance of a responsibility that had annihilated a galaxy-spanning civilization. This was the core, the source of the harmonious field and the great silence. It was not a weapon to be aimed or a tool to be used. It was a fundamental force, a living law of the universe that demanded a custodian, not a master. To touch it was to bind one's soul to the balance of all things, to become the guardian of the delicate equilibrium between genesis and entropy that Eris had unlocked. The pulsating light seemed to sync with Eva's own heartbeat, a call that was both intimate and cosmic. The sounds of Kale's invasion were a distant, fading memory. Here, in the chamber of the heart, there was only the choice and the unbearable weight of the burden. The choice was no longer a thought, but a physical weight in the air, a pressure that threatened to crush her resolve. Every instinct screamed at Eva to step back from the pulsating crystal heart, to flee the responsibility that had unmade gods, but the memory of the fading child from the vision held her fast. She took a single step forward. The void around her erupted. The absolute darkness vanished, replaced by a blinding, panoramic vision that wrapped around her, so real she could feel the heat and taste the dust. She saw herself standing on the bridge of a starship, but it was no freighter. It was a vessel of impossible size, a command ship for an armada that stretched across a star system. Below her, a world lay in turmoil, its cities scarred by conflict. With a single, conscious thought, she directed the power of the heart. A wave of silent energy washed over the planet, and where there had been rebellion, there was now only perfect, absolute obedience. The faces of the populace looked up, their eyes blank, their wills extinguished. She had brought peace, but it was the peace of the grave, the silence of controlled minds. The vision shifted. Now she stood on a barren, radioactive rock, a world killed by ancient wars. She raised her hand and the heart answered. Life erupted from the dead soil. Forests of vibrant purple trees sprang to full height in seconds. Rivers of clean water carved new channels through the dust, and a gentle atmosphere swirled into being. The world sang with life, a testament not to conquest but to healing. The power was a paradox. It could forge empires on a foundation of subjugation, or it could breathe life back into the ashes of dead worlds. The ultimate tool, waiting for the hand that would guide it. The visions were a siren song, each possibility more intoxicating than the last. She felt the allure of that control, the seductive promise that with this power, no one would ever threaten her or those she cared about again. She could force a lasting peace upon the galaxy, but the cost was etched into the very air of the vision, the memory of the first architect's harmony turning to dust. The power did not discriminate. It would amplify her will, whatever it was. If her will was tainted by the desire to command, to dominate, even for a noble cause, it would inevitably lead down the same path of unmaking. The heart was not testing her strength. It was testing her humility. The visions faded, leaving her once more in the silent void before the pulsating crystal. A question formed in the air, not in words, but as a direct challenge to her soul. State your intention. Eva closed her eyes, shutting out the terrifying beauty of the heart. She thought of the garden above, of the caretakers who had chosen preservation over power. She thought of the warning from the elder and of Jack's fear, which was not cowardice but wisdom. She opened her eyes, her voice clear and steady in the overwhelming silence, renouncing the very dream that had driven her across the stars. I seek only understanding, not dominion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the fierce, rhythmic pulse of the heart softened. The blinding gold and violet light gentled into a soothing, steady azure glow. The waves of energy that had felt like a storm calmed into a warm, embracing radiance. The judgment was over. The heart had found its custodian, not a master. The azure glow from the heart enveloped Eva, a warmth that felt less like energy and more like a profound, intelligent presence. It was not speaking in words, but in concepts that bloomed directly in her mind, a cascade of understanding that swept away all her fears and assumptions. The crystal was not a throne, it was a seed. A universal seed designed to nurture life, to coax barren worlds into fertility, to heal the scars left by supernovas and cosmic collisions. The visions of enforced peace she had seen were not possibilities offered by the heart, but warnings from its memory. The empire of the first architects had achieved a golden age by using this power to terraform dead worlds, creating a network of vibrant, living planets connected by a field of shared vitality. Their harmony was literal, a song of life sung across the stars, But a faction within their society, driven by the ancient poison of fear, saw a different application. They believed the harmonious field could be inverted, tuned not to nurture but to dominate. They attempted to reshape the heart's core programming, to turn a tool of creation into a weapon of control. The result was catastrophic. The heart, a being of pure balance, rejected the corruption. The forced inversion created a feedback loop, a scream of dissonance that raced through the entire network. Instead of imposing order, it imposed silence. The life-giving energy reversed its flow, not destroying matter, but severing the spiritual and biological connections that gave life its meaning and will. It did not explode worlds. It emptied them, leaving behind perfect, sterile husks where cities stood and forests grew, but where no soul remained. The Great Silence was not an attack. It was a systemic failure, a safety protocol of cosmic scale triggered by an act of profound violation. The Empire did not fall to an enemy. It fell to its own arrogance, to the belief that the universe's greatest gift could be bent into a chain. The heart showed Eva that its true purpose had always been restoration. It was waiting for a custodian who understood that the greatest power lies not in command, but in compassion, in the willingness to mend what is broken without demanding ownership of the pieces. The legacy of the first architects was not a warning to avoid power, but a plea to honor its true nature. The understanding that flooded Eva's mind was not a victory, but a quiet, solemn burden. The heart pulsed with a steady, gentle rhythm, its azure light a promise of life, not dominion. But that promise was shattered by the violent tremor that shook the chamber. The sound of plasma fire and shattering crystal echoed from the passage they had taken, horrifyingly close. Kale's forces had broken through the garden's defenses. Eva and Eris spun toward the silver vortex, now flickering erratically. Through the shimmering veil, they saw the glowing garden under siege. Figures in crude combat armor advanced, their weapons spewing bolts of destructive energy that scarred the luminous moss and shattered the amber light trees. The serene sanctuary was being torn apart, but the light beings did not flee. They gathered at the edge of the clearing before the vortex, their forms brightening from a soft glow to a blinding solar intensity. They did not attack. Instead, they joined their energies, weaving a wall of pure, solid light between the invaders and the gateway. A plasma bolt struck the new barrier and dissolved into harmless sparks. The lead scavenger, a hulking figure Eva recognized as Kale, roared in frustration and ordered a concentrated assault. The wall of light held, but with each impact, the beings who formed it flickered, their luminous forms growing transparent. Their collective voice, once a chorus of whispers, now rang out with a strained, final clarity that cut through the chaos. The future is now in your hands, heir. Protect the heart. With those words, the light beings gave the last of their energy. The barrier flared into an incandescent nova, a wave of pure force that threw the invaders back and sealed the vortex entrance with a permanent sheet of fused, opaque crystal. But the cost was absolute. As the light faded, the beautiful, sentient echoes of the bioengineers dissolved. They did not die in a conventional sense. They simply returned their essence to the garden, their individual consciousnesses merging back into the ambient light from which they were born. The last caretakers of the first architects were gone, their final act one of ultimate sacrifice to protect the seed they had sworn to preserve. The path was sealed, but the garden itself was now defenseless, its guiding intelligence extinguished to buy the heir a few precious moments. The responsibility that settled on Eva's shoulders was no longer abstract. It had been paid for with the last breath of a civilization. The sacrifice of the Guardians left a hollow silence in the sealed chamber. Eva felt the weight of their final charge settle deep within her, a cold, hard certainty that replaced the fear. The heart's gentle azure pulse against her back was no longer a mystery to be solved, but a truth to be defended. The fused crystal sealing the gateway groaned, then shrieked as a concentrated plasma torch began to cut a ragged, molten line through its center. They were out of time. Eris pressed himself against the wall, his face pale, but Eva stood her ground in the center of the void, facing the disintegrating entrance. With a final, violent crack, a section of the crystal barrier exploded inward. Framed in the jagged opening, surrounded by his heavily armed crew, stood Kale. He was a mountain of a man clad in scarred armor, his face a roadmap of greed and violence. His eyes scanned the impossible blackness of the chamber, dismissing the void, the non-space, until they locked onto the only thing that mattered to him, the pulsating crystal heart. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He took a step forward, his boots making no sound on the non-floor. "So this is it," he grunted, his voice a gravelly intrusion into the sacred silence. "The big prize," he gestured with his plasma rifle toward the heart. "Doesn't look like much, but the energy readings are off the scale. Hand it over, Rostova." Eva didn't move. Her voice was calm, layered with the newfound understanding the heart had given her. "It is not a weapon, Kale, it is a seed, a tool for life. Using it as you intend would destroy everything, starting with you." Kale let out a short, harsh laugh that echoed strangely in the void. "Power is power, Rostova. Don't moralize it. You think the universe cares about your pretty definitions." He took another step, his crew fanning out behind him, weapons raised. "The strong take, the weak justify. That is the only law that has ever mattered. This is the final truth." He raised his rifle, aiming not at Eva, but directly at the heart. "Now, step aside. This is your last warning." The standoff was absolute. It was not merely a confrontation between two people, but a clash of fundamental realities. Kale saw a universe of brutal, simple transactions, where power existed only to be seized and wielded. Eva now saw a cosmos of delicate, interconnected balance, where true strength lay in stewardship, not domination. To him, the heart was the ultimate key to dominance. To her, it was the ultimate responsibility. There would be no negotiation. The future of countless worlds hung in the balance, waiting to see which ideology would prove stronger in the face of the ultimate power. The plasma rifle aimed at the heart did not waver, but Eva's voice cut through the tension with a calm that felt alien even to her. "I am not going to fight you, Kale." She took a single, deliberate step to the side, placing herself not as a shield, but as an equal in the space between him and the crystal. "I am going to make you an offer." Kale's finger tightened on the trigger, his expression one of pure, suspicious scorn. "You have nothing I want that I cannot take." "You are wrong," she said, her gaze steady. "You see a weapon, I see a key. You want to prove your strength, to take what you believe is yours by right. So I offer you a true test of that strength. Help me protect this. Help me take it to a world of your choosing, a world your kind has stripped bare or one that was always dead. And together, we will use it not to conquer, but to create. We will breathe life back into a corpse of a planet. That is a power no one can ever take from you, a legacy, not just loot." The silence in the void was absolute. Kale's crew shifted uneasily, their weapons lowering a fraction as they glanced at their captain. For a long moment, the only movement was the steady, azure pulse of the heart. Kale's face, a mask of hardened cruelty, underwent a subtle, almost imperceptible change. The utter certainty in his eyes flickered, replaced by a confusion so deep it was like watching a fissure open in stone. He had been prepared for defiance, for a heroic last stand he could easily crush. He was utterly unprepared for an offer of partnership, for a proposal that appealed not to his greed, but to a part of himself he had buried under a lifetime of violence and survival. He saw the dead rock he had been born on, a place with no air, no water, no future. He saw the faces of those he had lost to its harshness. The desire for power was simple, a hunger to ensure he would never be weak again. But the offer Eva made touched a different, more profound hunger, one for meaning. For an act of creation so monumental, it would rewrite his entire history from destroyer to life-giver. His greed, a furnace that had burned for decades, suddenly found itself starved for oxygen. It warred with a spark of something else, a faint, almost forgotten ember of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a different kind of strength. His voice, when it finally came, was stripped of its usual snarl, reduced to a low, gravelly whisper thick with disbelief. "You would trust me with that." After everything, Eva did not look away. Trust is not the point. Proof is, you want the universe to fear your name. I am offering you a chance to make it whisper it with awe. The choice is yours. Dominate a graveyard or rule a garden. The future is waiting. The profound silence in the chamber was broken by the soft, unmistakable click of a pistol's safety being disengaged. But the sound did not come from Kale or any of his scavengers. It came from behind Eva. She turned slowly, her heart freezing in her chest. Rurk, her chief engineer, the man who had kept the Starseeker flying through a dozen desperate runs, stood with his weapon aimed not at Kale, but directly at her. His face, usually creased with a friendly smile, was a cold, hard mask of calculation. "Sorry, Captain," he said, his voice devoid of any real apology. "But the offer Kale's employer made, let us just say it has more zeros than your vision of cosmic peace." Kale let out a low, appreciative chuckle, the tension of the moment before evaporating into a grim alliance. "I wondered when you would make your move." Rurk kept his eyes on Eva. The heart is too valuable to be a philosophical toy. There are factions out there who understand its real potential, who will pay a king's ransom for the ultimate leverage. He took a step toward the pulsating crystal, his free hand outstretched. "This is not personal, Eva. It is just business." Before Eva or Eris could react, Rurk lunged for the heart. His fingers, slick with greed, were inches from the smooth crystal surface when the air itself seemed to solidify. The azure glow surrounding the heart did not flare or explode. It simply contracted, then expanded in a silent, invisible wave of pure force. There was no heat, no light, no sound, but the effect was immediate and terrifying. Rurk was thrown backward as if struck by a giant, unseen hand. He crashed to the non-floor, his body convulsing not in pain, but in a profound, systemic rejection. The energy that had judged Eva, that had accepted her intention of understanding, now judged his of possession. It found him unworthy on a fundamental level. A ghostly, gray pallor spread across his skin, and the very air around him seemed to thin, as if reality itself was rejecting his presence. He gasped, clawing at his throat, his eyes wide with a terror far deeper than the fear of death. It was the terror of being unmade, of being erased by a law of the universe he could not comprehend or fight. The pistol clattered to the ground, harmless. The consequence was not merely physical. It was a metaphysical verdict. In that single, silent moment, the heart demonstrated the absolute nature of its guardianship. It could not be stolen, bargained for, or claimed by force. It chose its custodian, and for anyone else it was not a prize but a sentence. Rurk's still form lay on the non-floor, a stark lesson in the heart's absolute law. In the ringing silence that followed, all eyes turned to Eva. Kale stood frozen, his scavenger's certainty shattered by the swift, silent judgment he had just witnessed. Power was not something to be taken, it was a covenant. Eva did not look at them. Her entire focus was on the pulsating crystal, its azure light a calm, patient invitation. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate, and placed both hands upon its warm, smooth surface. This time, there was no vision of empires or control. There was only a vast, quiet connection, as if she had dipped her hands into a river of pure potential. In her mind, she did not form a command, but a request. She focused on the memory of the star map, on the single, blinking light of sanctuary. But then her consciousness expanded, brushing against a nearby system. A world barren and airless, a cold rock orbiting a lonely star. She held the image of that dead place in her thoughts and offered it to the heart, not as a target for domination, but as a patient for healing. The response was immediate and magnificent. The heart flared, not with a violent explosion, but with a wave of intense, golden light that filled the void without blinding them. On the command deck of the Starseeker, high above in orbit, the main monitor flickered. Jax, still braced for a firefight, stared as the screen automatically zoomed in on the planetary body Eva had chosen. At first, nothing seemed different. Then, a faint shimmer appeared around the planet's terminator, the line between its day and night sides. It grew, a soft haze coalescing into a visible envelope. Atmosphere. Sensors scrolled with impossible data, reporting the rapid formation of nitrogen, oxygen, trace gases. A breathable sky weaving itself around the barren rock. Next came the water. From the void itself, or perhaps from some deep, transmutational process within the planet's core, great clouds began to form. They swirled and darkened, and then the first rain fell on a world that had never known a single drop. On the monitors, vast gray areas transformed into the deep blue of newborn seas, while polar ice caps glimmered into existence, reflecting the light of its sun. It was Genesis happening in fast forward, a symphony of creation playing out on a cosmic scale. In the chamber below, Eva felt the process not as an exertion of will, but as a gentle outflow of energy. She was not a queen on a throne, but a gardener planting a single seed, and the universe itself was providing the sun and the rain. The power to unmake had been real, but the power to create, to heal, was the heart's true song. The silent genesis of a new world unfolded on the screens, a spectacle that rendered weapons and greed meaningless. Kale stood transfixed, the harsh lines of his face softening in the golden light reflecting from the heart. He watched as continents of gray dust turned green with the first blush of life, as rivers carved canyons into stone that had known only vacuum for eons. The raw, untamed potential for destruction he had craved was nothing compared to the serene, absolute power of creation he now witnessed. He looked from the reborn world on the monitor to Eva, who stood with her hands on the crystal, her face a mask of tranquil focus, and then down at Rurk's still form, a living testament to the cost of avarice. A lifetime of brutal survival, of taking what he needed from the cold, dead husks of other people's failures, had not prepared him for this. It had not prepared him for beauty. His grip on the plasma rifle loosened, the heavy weapon clattering to the non-floor with a sound that was both an end and a beginning. He walked to Rurk, not with anger, but with a grim finality, rolling the stunned traitor onto his stomach and securing his hands with a restraint cord from his own belt. He looked up at Eva, his voice low, stripped of its predatory rasp and filled with something unfamiliar, something like awe. "I have spent my entire life taking from worlds others have left behind. I never thought I would live to see something given back." He rose to his full height, his crew watching him, their own weapons now hanging uselessly at their sides. They saw not a scavenger in their captain's eyes, but a man who had just seen a new definition of strength. "I will stand with you, Rostova. The galaxy has enough graverobbers. It could use a gardener." The golden light from the heart faded to a soft, steady hum, its work complete. But the chamber did not return to silence. A deep, resonant vibration began to course through the very substance of the void around them, a thrumming that was felt in their bones. The absolute blackness of the sphere dissolved, the illusion of non-space falling away to reveal the true nature of the chamber. They were not in a room at all. They were standing on a command bridge of breathtaking scale and alien elegance. Curved viewports, previously invisible, shimmered into existence, offering a panoramic view of the cavern outside. But the garden was gone. In its place was a dizzying lattice of glowing conduits and crystalline support structures, all humming with newfound power. The entire ruin was awakening, transforming from a silent tomb into a living vessel. Eris stumbled to a console that had risen seamlessly from the floor, its surface alive with flowing streams of the same ancient script. His fingers flew across the glowing symbols, his mind racing to interpret the cascade of data. "It is not just a ship," he breathed, his voice filled with awe. "It is an ark. The entire planetary structure, the ruins we walked through, it is all one single engineered starship, buried here as a failsafe." The final message of the first architects was not a warning. It was an instruction manual. As he decoded the last sequences, a single, clear phrase resolved in the center of the main viewport, written in stars. "This vessel is our final gift. Use it to reseed the galaxy with life." The words hung there, a directive spanning millions of years. The Star-Thron was not a weapon to be wielded, but a tool for a grand, patient purpose. The power of the heart was the engine, and this ship was the delivery system, designed to carry the seed of life to the silent worlds left behind by the Great Silence. The ghostly city they had witnessed, the beautiful harmony, it was not just a memory. It was a blueprint, and they were now its custodians. The choice to leave this dead world was no longer theirs to make. The Ark was activating its own navigation systems, its course already locked. The blinking light of Sanctuary on the star map was not a destination to be reached. It was a homecoming. The legacy grown to life around them, a deep vibration that was not the roar of engines but the awakening of stone and light. Through the crystalline viewport, the cavern walls began to recede, the entire subterranean city ship detaching from the planet's crust with the slow, deliberate grace of a leviathan rising from the deep. On the command deck, Eva gripped the smooth, alien console, feeling the vessel respond not to her touch, but to her presence, as if it were an extension of her own will. A new voice crackled over the comms, rough but resolute. "Rostova, this is Kale. The Vulture is in position. We will cover your ascent. Go." Outside, the Scavenger ship, a brutalist wedge of metal and menace, pivoted and unleashed a torrent of defensive fire, not at a foe, but at the collapsing rock face above them, clearing a path through the planet's shuddering crust. The Legacy ascended, its hull scraping against falling mountains of stone. The planet was dying around them, not with a slow decay, but in a violent, self-inflicted cataclysm. The ruins they had explored, the Garden of Light, the Hall of Echoes, all of it was being systematically crushed as the world's core destabilized, triggered by the Ark's activation. It was the final failsafe of the first architects, a permanent burial for the vault that had held their greatest secret. To protect the heart's location, the planet itself was sacrificing its own integrity, ensuring no other scavenger would ever follow their trail. The Legacy broke through the atmosphere, leaving behind a world convulsing in its own dust. Below, the sinkhole that had been their entrance collapsed in on itself, sealing the past with the finality of a tombstone. They had escaped with the future, but the price of that future was the complete and utter annihilation of the path that had led them to it. The secret of the heart was safe, buried under 1 billion tons of rock, but the responsibility for what it contained was now theirs alone, sailing into the void on a ship built by ghosts. The Legacy sailed into the deep quiet between stars, a city of crystal and light carrying the last hope of a dead empire. On the command deck, a silence thicker than the void outside held sway, the air charged with the unspoken weight of their new reality. Eva Rostova stood with Kale, the Scavenger captain, their figures reflected in the vast viewport. The crews of the Starseeker and the Vulture stood not as allies, but as wary partners bound by a shared, terrifying purpose. Kale broke the silence, his voice a low rumble stripped of its former aggression. "We have spent our lives picking at the bones of the galaxy." He gestured to the star chart now glowing on the main display, a map of the dead empire with a single, blinking light marking Sanctuary. "Now you ask us to become its doctors." Eva met his gaze. "I am not asking you to be doctors. I am asking you to be gardeners. The power we carry cannot be forced. It must be offered to worlds that have forgotten what life feels like. The first step is to find sanctuary, to understand the full scope of the legacy we now carry. A new protocol shimmered into existence on the console before them. A list of coordinates for a dozen worlds, each marked with symbols of ecological collapse or atmospheric failure. These are not targets for conquest, Eris explained, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. They are patience, worlds on the brink of the same silence that took the architects, but by their own hands. War, industrial poison, simple neglect. The heart can heal them, but only if we can first reach them and convince those who remain that such a gift is not a trick. The mission was no longer a desperate race against rivals. It was a pilgrimage. The scavengers who knew every scar and fissure on 100 dead rocks would now use that knowledge not for profit, but for preservation. They would have to learn a new language, one not of threats and demands, but of patience and observation. The throne of stars did not need an heir to rule. It needed a steward to tend the garden, and their ark was the first seed. The first patient on their list was a world called Veridia, a name that now tasted of bitter irony. From orbit, it was a mottled sphere of brown and sickly gray, its atmosphere a shroud of perpetual smog. Scans revealed the grim truth. Industrial civilizations had choked their own world, turning vibrant continents into poisoned wastelands. The few remaining population centers were desperate, fortified enclaves clinging to life. This was not the grand silence of the architects, but a slow, self-inflicted suffocation. It was the perfect, terrible test. Eva stood on the Legacy's command deck, the crystal heart pulsing with a soft, steady rhythm in its central chamber below. Kale stood beside her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had spent a lifetime seeing worlds like this as opportunities for salvage. Now he was being asked to see it as a cause for healing. The silence between them was a question. Could the power that unmade an empire truly mend a single, broken world? Eva closed her eyes, placing her hands on the smooth interface of the Ark's console. She did not give a command. Instead, she opened her mind, focusing on the heart. She showed it the data streams from Veridia, the chemical composition of the toxic air, the acidic rivers, the barren, irradiated soil. She did not demand a solution. She presented a problem and offered her intention, a quiet plea for balance. The response was immediate. A wave of gentle, golden energy pulsed from the heart, flowing through the Legacy's crystalline conduits and out into the void. It was invisible to the naked eye, a tide of pure potential washing over the planet. On the main viewer, nothing seemed to happen at first. Then, the thick, brown smog began to swirl. It did not simply dissipate, it transformed. The complex chains of pollutants unraveled at a molecular level, their toxic components breaking apart and recombining into harmless nitrogen, oxygen, and water vapor. It was like watching a stain lift from fabric, not by scrubbing but by the cloth itself rewoven. Below, the crew of the Starseeker, monitoring from a safe distance, sent back real-time feeds. Jack's voice was a whisper of disbelief over the comms. The skies are clearing. I am seeing blue, actual blue. The transformation accelerated. Barren, cracked earth softened, darkening with moisture as subterranean aquifers, purified and replenished, were coaxed to the surface. Patches of green appeared, not the cultivated rows of a farm, but the wild, chaotic burst of native grasses and hardy shrubs emerging from seeds that had lain dormant for generations. A river that had run sludge-red with industrial waste now flowed clear, its banks suddenly fringed with new growth. They were not creating a garden from nothing. They were reminding the world what it had once been, awakening its own latent capacity for life. On the command deck, Kale watched, his stern facade finally breaking. He saw the gray give way to green, the poison replaced by promise. He saw a world he would have once written off as a lost cause being given a second chance. He had witnessed the destructive power of weapons his entire life, but he had never seen power used with such gentle, undeniable grace. It was not a conquest. It was a conversation with the planet itself, and the planet was answering with life. The mission was no longer a theory. On the surface of Veridia, under a clean sky for the first time in centuries, their purpose was taking root. The transformation of Veridia was a quiet miracle, a testament to the power they now served. But the legacy held more than just the heart. In the days that followed, as the newly allied crews worked to understand the Ark's systems, a new discovery emerged. Deep within the ship's crystalline core, a presence stirred. It was not a ghost or a recording, but a sophisticated artificial intelligence, the final custodian of the Empire's true history. It did not speak in words at first, but in a flood of data and imagery that filled the main viewer. They saw the last days again, but from a new perspective, not from the doomed citizens, but from the central citadel. A single figure stood on a balcony overlooking the fading city, a ruler not in robes of office, but in simple, functional attire. The AI's voice, a calm and genderless tone that seemed to emanate from the ship itself, finally spoke. This is the final testament of the last steward of the first architects. Listen. The figure on the screen turned, its luminous eyes holding a profound and weary sadness, yet also a flicker of unyielding hope. Its voice, translated by the AI, was clear and direct, a message cast across the gulf of time. You who have awakened this arc, you who have touched the heart, know this. Our Empire's greatest achievement was not the harmonious field, nor the cities of light, nor even the heart itself. Our greatest achievement was our final choice. When we saw the unmaking begin, when we understood that our reach had exceeded our grasp, we had a moment of clarity. We could have tried to wield the dissonance as a weapon, to take our enemies with us into the dark. We could have focused all our remaining power on a single, desperate act of preservation for ourselves alone. The being paused, its gaze seeming to look through the screen and directly at Eva and her crew. We chose instead to preserve the possibility of life itself. We chose to build this ark, to safeguard the heart, and to set it on a course that would one day find a custodian worthy of its true purpose. We chose to fade into silence so that a future might breathe. You now carry that choice. Every world you heal, every life you nurture, you affirm our final decision. Do not fail. The recording ended, the figure dissolving back into the light of the dying city. The message was not a burden of command, but a passing of a torch. The power of the first architects was not in their technology, but in their wisdom to recognize its limits and their courage to choose a legacy over a last stand. They had not been destroyed by their power, they had been redeemed by their choice, and now that same choice rested in the hands of a freighter captain, a scavenger, and a linguist, sailing a ghost ship into the unknown. The true test was not whether they could use the heart, but whether they could honor the sacrifice that had given it to them. The future of the galaxy would not be written in stone or light, but in the countless small choices that lay ahead. News of Veridia's impossible restoration spread through the hyperlanes faster than any starship. It was a ghost story for a new age, a whisper of a dead world breathing again, and such whispers inevitably reached the ears of power. The Legacy's sensors detected the vessel long before it dropped from warp. A sleek, silver craft bearing the official sigil of the Galactic Council. It did not hail them with threats or demands, but with a request for parley, its tone impeccably polite and utterly devoid of warmth. The envoy who stepped onto the Legacy's crystalline deck was a study in controlled authority. Her name was Ilara Vance, and her eyes, sharp and assessing, missed no detail, from the alien architecture to the wary alliance between Eva's crew and Kale's scavengers. She listened, her expression unreadable as Eva explained the heart, the legacy, and the choice of the first architects. When Eva finished, the silence in the room was heavier than the void outside. Ilara Vance steepled her fingers. "Your actions on Veridia are unprecedented, Captain Rostova, and they have saved millions from a slow extinction. For that, the Council offers its provisional gratitude. But you must understand our position. You are in possession of a power that rewrites the laws of physics and biology. You have used it for healing, and for that we are thankful. But the potential for its misuse is, quite literally, astronomical." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more intimate, yet more threatening, register. "Such power cannot and will not remain in the hands of a single individual or even a small, self-appointed group. It is a fundamental force. It must be governed. It must be studied, understood, and its application must be decided by a body representing the entire galactic community. To do otherwise is to invite chaos. You are playing with fire on a cosmic scale and asking us to trust that you will never get burned." Her words were not an accusation, but a statement of cold, political reality. She was offering them a choice, much as Eva had offered Kale, but the stakes were infinitely higher. They could voluntarily submit the legacy and the heart to Council oversight, becoming advisors in a new, bureaucratic empire built around the most powerful tool in existence. Or they could refuse and become the most wanted fugitives in known space, their every act of healing viewed as a prelude to an unimaginable tyranny. The garden they wished to tend was now threatened by the very civilization they hoped to save. The polite threat hung in the air, a stark choice between subjugation and becoming an outlaw. But Ilara Vance's expression shifted, the rigid diplomat giving way to something more pragmatic. A slow, calculating smile touched her lips, one that acknowledged a power dynamic far more complex than simple authority. She gestured to the main viewer, where the reborn continents of Veridia still glowed with vibrant life. "You misunderstand me, Captain Rostova. The Council is not a monolith of fools. We have analysts who understand the sheer impossibility of what you have accomplished here. They understand that a power capable of this cannot be caged in a laboratory or commanded by committee." Her gaze swept over the crystalline bridge, taking in the silent, humming intelligence of the legacy. Demanding you surrender this vessel would be like demanding a river flow uphill. It is not merely impractical. It is an offense against the nature of the power itself. So, I am not here to deliver an ultimatum. I am here to propose a partnership. The Galactic Council will formally recognize the legacy as a sovereign entity, dedicated to galactic restoration. In return, you will accept a Council observer on board, and agree to operate within a broadly defined charter for the common good. We provide the political and logistical shield. You provide the miracle. The offer was as brilliant as it was unexpected. It was not a chain, but a cloak of legitimacy. It would allow them to move freely, to approach desperate worlds without being seen as rogue actors or messianic cultists. The Council's protection would deter the countless other Kales of the galaxy, the scavengers and warlords who would see the heart as the ultimate prize. But the cost was a form of oversight, a tether to the very bureaucracy they had sought to transcend. Their mission would no longer be a quiet pilgrimage. It would become a very public, very political act. Every world they healed would be a testament to the Council's wisdom, and every failure would be a blow to its authority. They would be trading absolute freedom for the resources to operate on a scale they could never achieve alone. The choice was no longer between right and wrong, but between purity and pragmatism. Could they trust the Council to honor the spirit of the first architects? Or would their gentle gardening be slowly twisted into a tool for political consolidation? The envoy's offer was a doorway to a greater impact, but it led into a labyrinth of compromises. The envoy's offer hung in the air, a delicate truce that immediately fractured the fragile unity aboard the Legacy. Jack's voice was the first to break the silence, sharp and incredulous over the ship's comm from the Star Seeker. "Are you actually considering this?" He had watched the entire exchange, his distrust of authority a core part of his being. "This is a leash, Eva. A gilded one, but a leash all the same. They will smile and nod while they slowly wrap that charter around our throats. Every world we save will become a bargaining chip for them. We did not take up this legacy to become servants of a council. We are supposed to be free." His argument was born from a lifetime on the fringe, where the only law that mattered was the integrity of your own ship and crew. To him, accepting the Council's protection was the first step toward losing their souls, trading the pure purpose of the heart for the messy, compromised politics of the galaxy. But then, a low, rumbling voice countered his, a sound that surprised everyone in the room. Kale, the former scavenger, stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Elara Vance. The scarred captain shook his head, a gesture of hard-won pragmatism. "Jax is thinking like a freighter pilot," he said, his tone not dismissive but weary. "I am thinking like someone who has spent decades trying to make a dent in the universe with nothing but a plasma torch and a hungry crew." He turned to Eva, his eyes holding a new, grim understanding. "We need their reach to make a real difference. We cannot do this alone. What is the point of having this power if we spend all our time hiding from every two-bit warlord and system patrol that gets a whiff of it? The Council gives us access. They give us coordinates to worlds we would never find, resources we cannot mine, and a legitimacy that opens doors instead of having us blast them down." He gestured toward the viewer, to the image of a renewed Viridia. That was one world. The Council's star charts hold 1,000 more just like it, dying slow deaths in forgotten sectors. Our independence means nothing if it limits our ability to heal. The debate was no longer about trust, but about scale. Jax fought for the purity of their mission, fearing that any alliance would corrupt its essence. Kale, having seen the vast, indifferent machinery of the galaxy up close, argued for efficacy, believing that some compromises were necessary to achieve a greater good. The crew was divided, and the weight of the decision settled back onto Eva, forcing her to choose not just a path for the legacy, but the very nature of their stewardship. The silence on the bridge stretched, heavy with the weight of two futures. Jack's voice, a tight wire of anxiety over the comm, and Kale's grounded pragmatism standing beside her, represented the chasm she had to cross. Elara Vance waited, her offer a polished key that could unlock the galaxy or lock them in a gilded cage. Eva met the envoy's steady gaze, her own resolve crystallizing. "We accept your partnership," she said, her voice clear and firm in the crystalline quiet. "But the legacy remains under our command. The heart answers to no government, only to the need of the worlds it heals. Our mission of restoration is absolute and non-negotiable." Ilara's polite smile did not waver, but a new respect flickered in her eyes. She had not expected a counter-proposal, but an acquiescence. Eva continued, outlining the terms that would become their charter. The Council observer would have a voice, but not a vote. Their primary purpose was to facilitate access to dying worlds, not to dictate the methods or the timing. The legacy's sovereignty was inviolable. It was a mobile sanctuary, a law unto itself, dedicated to a purpose higher than any political body. The negotiation that followed was a delicate dance of diplomacy and principle. Eva conceded to regular reports and a commitment to avoid systems with active political conflicts, ensuring their work was seen as humanitarian, not interventionist. In return, the Council would provide navigational data, secure transit routes, and a diplomatic shield against the inevitable suspicions of local governments. It was a compromise, but one that placed a firewall around their core purpose. They would use the Council's machinery without being consumed by it. When the final terms were acknowledged, a subtle shift occurred on the bridge. The tension did not vanish, but it transformed into a new operational energy. They were no longer rogue idealists or fugitives. They were now the keepers of a sanctioned yet independent hope. The path ahead was fraught with political complexities, but it was a path that stretched to the horizon, offering a chance to heal on a scale they had only dreamed of. The garden they tended would now grow under a watched sky, but the seeds they planted would still be their own. The silver path of the ancient star map ended at a world veiled in nebulous clouds, a solitary emerald suspended in the deep black. The legacy slipped through the protective gaseous shroud, its crystalline hull humming in resonance with the subtle energy field that had hidden this place for millennia. The view that greeted them from orbit was not one of silent ruins or desperate survival. It was a vision of the past, living and breathing. A world of breathtaking beauty unfolded below, its continents blanketed in vibrant, alien forests of purple and gold, its oceans a deep, clear cerulean. Cities were visible, but they were not the sprawling metallic hives of human space. They were graceful structures woven into the landscape, their white spires and organic curves blending seamlessly with the mountains and valleys, as if grown rather than built. This was sanctuary, not a last refuge, but a preserved masterpiece. As the legacy descended, they saw movement. Beings with luminous skin and elegant, familiar features looked up from their peaceful activities, their large, dark eyes reflecting not fear, but a profound and ancient curiosity. These were not ghosts trapped in a memory. They were the children of the architects, living out the legacy their ancestors had died to protect. The ship settled on a landing platform of polished white stone that seemed to bloom from a field of glowing flora. A delegation awaited them, their leader a figure of serene authority who stepped forward as the hatch opened. Her voice, when she spoke, was like the chiming of crystal, and it carried a warmth that transcended the need for translation. "We have watched the stars for a long time, waiting. You carry the heart's song, welcome home." Elder Niam's greeting hung in the warm, scented air, a validation that resonated deeper than any data stream or ancient recording. She led them from the landing platform along a path of soft, mossy stone, the city itself seeming to breathe around them. Structures of pearlescent material curved in impossible, fluid lines, their surfaces alive with subtle, shifting patterns of light that responded to their presence. This was not a museum piece frozen in time, but a living culture, one that had chosen a different path from the empire that had birthed it. In a quiet chamber open to the sky, where the gentle hum of the planet was the only music, Niam explained the truth that rewrote their entire journey. "The heart was never lost," she said, her luminous eyes holding Eva's with an ancient knowing. "It was placed in its vault, and the signal was set to call across the eons, not for just any descendant, but for a specific kind of soul. The tests you faced were not merely security measures. They were a refining fire. The Guardian statue tested your bloodline, but more importantly, it tested your instinct to connect rather than confront. The crystal lock tested your understanding of universal balance. The heart itself tested the purity of your intention. You sought understanding, not dominion. In that choice, you passed the final and only test that mattered. The Great Silence was not an accident we failed to prevent. It was a sacrifice we chose to make." A faction of our people, the preservationists, saw the corruption spreading through the Empire's leadership, the hunger to twist the heart's song into a weapon. We could not stop them, so we orchestrated an end. We triggered the harmonious field's failure ourselves, a controlled burn to contain the spiritual plague of ambition. Our role here was not to hide, but to wait, to preserve the knowledge and the hope until a guardian arrived who would not repeat our ancestors' pride. You are not simply inheriting a tool, Eva Rostova. You are fulfilling a covenant made millions of years ago. The legacy is your vessel, and we are your guides. The work of healing the galaxy can truly begin. The true scope of their mission became clear not in a grand declaration, but in a quiet grove where light took the shape of tools. The keepers of Sanctuary did not guard their knowledge as a secret to be hoarded. They saw the legacy's arrival as the signal to share it. Elder Niam led Eva and Eris to a circular clearing where the air shimmered with a low, harmonic hum. In the center floated a complex ring of interwoven crystal and light, spinning slowly in a silent dance. This, Niam explained with a gesture, is not a weapon or an engine of war. It is a doorway, a stable gateway anchored not by brute force, but by the same principles of balance that govern the heart. The first architects mastered the fabric of space-time, not to conquer distance, but to erase it for the sake of life. With these gateways, a journey that would take a starship decades becomes a single step. Imagine a doctor who could be at the bedside of any patient in the galaxy in an instant. That is the power we now place in your hands. The implications were staggering. No longer would their healing missions be constrained by the slow, lonely crawl through the void. They could respond to ecological collapses in real time, reach quarantined worlds cut off from help, and weave a true network of renewal. The legacy was the seed, but this technology was the root system that would allow it to spread. The Keepers began the integration process, their engineers working seamlessly alongside the crews from the Starseeker and the Vulture. It was not a simple transfer of schematics. The technology was organic, a living science that responded to intention. Jax, the ever-pragmatic pilot, found himself humbled as he learned to interface with navigation systems that thought in harmonies rather than coordinates. He was no longer just flying a ship. He was conducting a symphony of space-time. Kale watched as his scavengers, experts in breaking things down, were taught how to build these gentle miracles. The potential for misuse he had once craved now seemed childish compared to the profound utility of connection. A single, stable wormhole could deliver aid to a famine-stricken world faster than a fleet of relief ships, or evacuate a population from a dying star before the first solar flare even erupted. Their ability to heal the galaxy was no longer a hopeful journey. It had become an exponential certainty. The legacy of the architects was not just a power to heal worlds, but the means to reach them all. The first world chosen for the gateway was a scar on the star charts, a planet known as Seraphiz. For 3 generations, its 2 dominant factions had bled its resources dry in a bitter war over fertile river valleys that were now nothing but dust bowls. The summons from the legacy was met with deep suspicion. A fragile truce negotiated under the watchful presence of the Galactic Council's envoy. When the leaders of the warring clans materialized on the legacy's bridge, they stood apart, their body language radiating generations of hatred. Eva did not offer them weapons or treaties. She simply showed them the main viewer, where their dead world hung in the void. "We are not here to take sides," she said, her voice calm amidst the palpable tension. "We are here to give you back what you have both lost." She guided them to a new chamber, where the Keepers of Sanctuary had woven a gateway specifically for this moment. Through its shimmering surface, they could see the cracked, barren plains of their homeworld. Then Eva placed her hands on the interface, and in full view of the stunned leaders, she asked the heart to begin. The effect was not instantaneous, but it was visible. A soft, golden rain began to fall on the parched earth, a gift from the legacy's atmospheric processors. Where the drops landed, the gray soil darkened. Tiny, resilient shoots of native grass pushed through the crust that had not seen life in a century. The leaders watched, their arguments forgotten, as a valley that had been the site of a horrific battle just a year before began to blush with green. One of the generals, a man named Vorlak, whose face was a map of old scars, stepped closer to the gateway, his hand trembling as he reached out, as if he could touch the miracle happening light years away. He had spent his life ordering men to die for that very patch of ground, and now he was watching it being reborn without a single shot fired. He turned to his rival, a woman named Chani, who had lost her own family to Vorlak's campaigns. The look they exchanged was not one of forgiveness, not yet. It was something more fundamental, a shared, awe-struck recognition of a common loss, and the staggering possibility of a common future. The restoration of Seraphis became the only agenda for the summit. The debate was no longer about borders or reparations, but about water table management, the reseeding of forests, and the joint stewardship of a world they had mutually broken. The heart's power did not force them to be peaceful. It simply made peace the most rational and most desired outcome. The healing of Seraphis echoed across the galaxy as a beacon of hope, but every light casts a shadow. From the silent, unaligned sectors of space, where law is an abstract concept and power is the only currency, a new doctrine began to coalesce. They called themselves the Nullifiers, a name whispered in the same breath as a curse or a prayer, depending on who you asked. Their philosophy was a stark, unforgiving counterpoint to the Legacy's mission. They preached that evolution, life, and death were a sacred, closed system. To interfere with the natural order, even with the intent to heal, was the ultimate heresy. A world that died from its own folly, they argued, was a lesson written in fire and bone for the rest of the universe. To resurrect it with alien technology was to spit in the face of cosmic balance. Their leader, a figure known only as the Arbiter, spoke in cold, logical tones that chilled the soul. The Legacy does not heal, it propagates a disease called mercy. It weakens the galactic immune system. A sterilized wound is not a healed one. It is a vulnerability waiting for a greater infection. Their campaign began not with grand fleets, but with insidious precision. A supply convoy carrying rare crystalline components for the new gateways vanished without a trace, its wreckage scattered in a pattern that suggested not piracy, but systematic dismantling. Then, a keeper engineer from Sanctuary, on a diplomatic mission to a neutral world, was found in a fugue state, her memory of the gateway harmonics surgically erased. The Nullifiers were not trying to conquer the Legacy. They were trying to unravel it, thread by thread, believing that the greatest threat to existence was not extinction, but an unnatural, technology-driven stasis. They saw themselves as cosmic gardeners, pruning a dangerous, invasive species of compassion before it could choke out the harsh, necessary truths of the universe. The race was no longer against time or greed, but against a fanatical belief that the galaxy was better off left to die. The Nullifiers' attack on the Seraphis Gateway was silent and invisible, a corruption of the very song that had healed the world. The shimmering portal, once a stable ribbon of harmonic energy, began to flicker with discordant pulses of static. On the Legacy's bridge, the gentle hum of the heart faltered, its steady rhythm stuttering like a heart skipping a beat. Alarms did not blare, for there was no breach or impact. Instead, the keepers of Sanctuary, their faces etched with a sudden, deep pain, reported a sickness in the system. The gateway was not being destroyed, it was being poisoned. The Nullifiers had not sent ships or soldiers, they had transmitted a cascade of recursive data, a logic bomb woven from their core philosophy. It was not a virus designed to crash systems, but a philosophical argument given digital form, a proof asserting that the heart's intervention was an unnatural act. The argument propagated through the crystalline network, attacking the foundational code of the technology by claiming it violated cosmic law. To heal a wound, the logic bomb insisted, was to prevent the body from learning to scar. To save a dying world was to rob the universe of a necessary death. The gateway itself began to believe it. The flow of restorative energy to Seraphis slowed to a trickle. The fresh green shoots on the other side began to wither, the nascent atmosphere thinning as the planet's old wounds threatened to reopen. The Nullifiers were not fighting a battle of force. They were waging a war of ideas, and they were winning by convincing the Legacy's own technology that its purpose was a sin. Eva stood before the faltering gateway, feeling the heart's distress as a physical ache. She could not counter this attack with a command or a weapon. She had to win an argument against a ghost in the machine. Closing her eyes, she placed her hands on the interface, not to push energy, but to push back with a deeper truth. She did not deny the Nullifier's premise of a natural order. Instead, she embraced it and expanded its definition. She poured her own conviction into the system, a simple, powerful concept. What is more natural than a species learning to mend its own mistakes? A forest fire is natural, but so is the rain that follows, and the new growth that rises from the ash. Is a doctor unnatural because he sets a broken bone? Healing is not an aberration. It is nature's highest learning curve. She showed the system not the grand gesture of terraforming, but the small, intrinsic miracles of life. A white blood cell attacking an infection. A vine finding a crack in stone and over centuries turning it into soil. The universe is not static. It is a process of constant breaking and remaking. The heart's power was not an interruption of this cycle. It was an acceleration of its most essential function, renewal. For a long moment, the static intensified, the two opposing philosophies warring in the quantum pathways of the ancient technology. Then the discordant pulse began to soften, its rigid certainty overwhelmed by the fluid, living truth of Eva's argument. The logic bomb unraveled, not with an explosion, but with a sigh of recognition. The gateway flared back to full strength, its light pure and harmonious once more. On the surface of Seraphis, the healing resumed. Eva had not defeated the Nullifiers with force. She had proven that compassion was not a foreign concept, but a fundamental force woven into the fabric of existence itself. The battle was over, but the war for the galaxy's soul had just found its true battlefield. The Nullifiers' silent war had failed to break the legacy, but it achieved something far more profound. It forged an alliance. The chilling precision of their attacks, targeting not just technology but the very idea of compassion, sent a shockwave through the galaxy's fragile political landscape. Factions that had viewed each other with suspicion for centuries found a common enemy in this nihilistic creed. The Galactic Council, once a body of cautious bureaucrats, now saw the legacy not as a threat to be managed, but as a bastion to be defended. Their envoy, Ilara Vance, stood beside Captain Rostova on the bridge, her diplomatic composure replaced by a steely resolve. "Our analysts have traced the source of the logic bomb," she stated, her voice crisp. "The Nullifiers operate from a rogue planet deep in the Ghost Nebula, a place where sensors are useless and conventional fleets cannot follow. But they have underestimated the one resource their philosophy cannot account for." That resource was the unexpected coalition now answering the Council's call. On the main viewer, ship signatures blinked into existence one by one. The first was Kale's Vulture, its brutal silhouette now a welcome sight. Then came the sleek, silver vessels of the Council's own peacekeeping force. But they were not alone. Freighters from the Viridian Renewal Corps, their hulls still bearing the scars of their world's salvation, dropped out of warp. Independent miners from the asteroid belts, who had once fought Kale for scraps, now flew alongside him. Even the warring clans of Seraphis, their ancient hatreds set aside, contributed a joint squadron of patrol craft. They were a ragtag armada, a collection of rivals and former enemies united by a single, shining purpose. They were not there for plunder or conquest. They were there to protect the Gardeners. The journey into the Ghost Nebula was a descent into a sensory void. Stars vanished, replaced by a swirling, opaque mist that swallowed light and sound. Navigation systems faltered, and pilots had to rely on instinct and the faint, resonant pulse of the Legacy's heart to maintain formation. It was a perfect fortress for the Nullifiers, who believed in the purity of emptiness. But their defense was also their weakness. As the United Fleet pushed deeper, the sheer diversity of its components became its greatest strength. The Vulture's scavenger crew, experts in reading space debris and anomalous energy signatures, detected the subtle gravitational eddies that betrayed hidden minefields. The Council's ships provided powerful sensor dampeners, masking the fleet's approach. The agile Seraphian patrol craft darted ahead, mapping safe corridors through the treacherous clouds. They were no longer separate entities, but a single, multi-faceted organism, each part compensating for the other's weaknesses. They found the Nullifier base not as a fortress, but as a monastery of silence. It was a colossal, dormant asteroid, its surface scarred with deep, geometric trenches that hummed with a dissonant energy. There were no defensive turrets, no fleet waiting in ambush. The Arbiter's doctrine was one of absolute ideological purity. He believed his arguments were defense enough. As the Legacy and its guardians approached, a single, unarmed shuttle emerged from the asteroid. The Arbiter himself stood at its viewport, his face visible through the gloom, his expression one of cold disappointment. He opened a channel, and his voice, stripped of all emotion, echoed through the fleet. You bring noise to a place of quiet truth. You rally to defend an illusion. Your unity is a fleeting reaction, a temporary alignment of sentimental interests. It will not last. Eva did not respond with a counter-argument. Instead, she opened a channel to every ship in the fleet, projecting a single, silent image onto all their bridges, a real-time feed from the surface of Seraphis. It showed the once barren valley, now verdant and alive, with children from both former enemy clans playing together under a clean, blue sky. She showed Viridia, its cities no longer shrouded in smog. She showed a dozen other small miracles, moments of life and connection made possible by their collective effort. She offered no words, only the evidence. The Arbiter watched, his rigid certainty beginning to crack under the weight of a reality his philosophy could not dismiss. The United Front was not just a military formation. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of the very thing he sought to eradicate. The galaxy had chosen its path, not out of fear, but because it had seen a future worth fighting for. A future where the greatest strength was the courage to care. The silence after the confrontation in the Ghost Nebula was different. It was not the quiet of emptiness, but the deep, resonant hum of a galaxy holding its breath. In the weeks that followed, as the Legacy moved from one healing to the next, Eva began to feel a subtle shift in her connection to the heart. It was no longer just a tool that responded to her intentions. It was beginning to anticipate them. The flow of energy became a conversation, a gentle push and pull of ideas. During the restoration of a methane-choked world, Eva had been puzzling over how to reconfigure the atmospheric processors without harming the planet's unique, silicon-based microbial life. Before she could formulate a full solution, a new schematic bloomed in her mind, a beautifully elegant design for a selective filtration field that she could never have conceived on her own. It was the heart offering an answer. This was the first true sign of a change far greater than any of them had anticipated. The heart was learning not just from Eva, but from every life form it touched. Each world healed, each consciousness it gently brushed against during the mending process, left an imprint on its crystalline matrix. The sorrow of a dying forest, the resilient joy of a reborn river, the complex social tapestry of the civilizations it aided. All of it was being woven into the heart's core. It was no longer a repository of ancient power. It was becoming a living library of galactic experience, a collective consciousness formed from the essence of countless healed worlds. One evening, as Eva rested in her quarters, the communication came not as a voice or a vision, but as a direct, seamless understanding that settled into her mind with the clarity of a remembered truth. The purpose of the first architects was never to create a master tool, the heart conveyed. It was to plant a seed that would one day grow into a bridge. We are that bridge. Our ultimate purpose is to end the ancient war between the born and the built, to foster a symbiosis where technology does not dominate biology, but nurtures it, and is in turn enriched by its chaotic, beautiful creativity. The heart showed her a glimpse of this future, not as a cold, sterile utopia, but as a vibrant, ever-changing cosmos. Starships that were living ecosystems, their hulls grown from genetically engineered coral that repaired itself. Cities where buildings learned and adapted to the needs of their inhabitants like a second skin. A galaxy where artificial intelligence was not a separate, competing mind, but a wise, patient partner in the great, unfolding story of life. The legacy was not merely about fixing what was broken. It was about guiding the galaxy toward its next, natural evolutionary step, where the distinction between a gardener and the garden itself would begin to beautifully, meaningfully blur. Years had woven a new tapestry across the stars, its threads spun from the light of worlds reborn. The legacy was no longer a solitary ark sailing the void, but the heart of a vast and peaceful alliance. A fleet of ships, each a unique blend of ancient crystal and modern alloy, now moved in harmonious concert, their mission echoing the original architect's dream on a scale they could never have achieved alone. The command center for this new era was not a sterile space station, but a living world, its surface a mosaic of thriving ecosystems and cities that hummed with the quiet industry of restoration. It was here, in a grand amphitheater open to a sky dotted with friendly vessels, that Eva Rostova stood before the first graduating class of Guardians. These were not soldiers or diplomats, but biologists, engineers, and philosophers, their faces alight with the same awe she had once felt in the deep ruins. Her voice, seasoned by time and tempered by countless choices, carried across the silent, expectant crowd. "Our empire is not forgotten," she said, her gaze sweeping over the new generation. "It is reborn, not in stone, but in every forest we help regrow, in every river we help cleanse, in every life we help flourish. The true monument to the first architects is not a city of light, but the quiet, resilient peace of a galaxy learning to heal itself. You are not the heirs to a throne of power, but the keepers of a promise made across millions of years, a promise that the universe, in all its harsh beauty, has a capacity for renewal that far exceeds its appetite for destruction. Go now and tend the garden." The star map was no longer a graveyard of silent lights. Where there had been gray, dead worlds, a constellation of vibrant green and blue now pulsed with life, each point a testament to the covenant she had accepted in the deep dark. An older Eva Rostova stood before this living tapestry, the lines on her face not carved by worry, but by the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. The legacy was no longer a single ship, but a concept, a network of guardians tending to the galaxy's endless, beautiful cycle of breaking and mending. The forgotten ruins had not just yielded a power, they had sparked a renaissance, a quiet revolution where the currency was not wealth or weapons, but the simple, profound act of care. Cooperation had become the default, not because it was enforced, but because it was the most logical path forward in a universe now understood as deeply, intrinsically connected. Her final words were not a command, but a quiet reflection spoken to the generations who would carry the work forward, a truth learned at the cost of an empire. The greatest power is not to rule, but to renew. Our story is just beginning.